Harlem, New York. The Cotton Club was filled to capacity. It was Monday evening, September 16th, 1935. More than 200 guests occupied the tables. The performance on stage was in full motion. Illegal whiskey flowed without restriction. The affluent white clientele from downtown mingled with criminals, political figures, and famous personalities in the type of atmosphere that made the Cotton Club both the most dazzling and the most perilous nightclub in all of New York. The music blared loudly, the chatter was even louder, and no one was giving any special attention to the table positioned toward the rear where Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat by himself, sipping a bourbon and observing the performance with the silent focus that defined everything Johnson ever did. No one took notice, that is, until Dutch Schultz rose from his reserved seating near the stage. His complexion turned crimson from costly whiskey and from the fury that had been mounting inside him throughout the entire evening, and started walking, actually stomping, across the establishment toward the spot where Johnson was seated. His protection detail rushed to keep up with him. Other guests began turning their heads to observe, because Schultz's movements made it obvious that something significant was about to unfold. Schultz arrived at Johnson's table and didn't bend down to engage in a discreet conversation, didn't reduce his volume to preserve the illusion of polite dialogue between criminal counterparts. Instead, Schultz brought his hand crashing down on Johnson's table with such force that the bourbon glass jolted and overflowed, and he yelled with enough volume that people on the opposite side of the club paused their discussions to hear. Loudly enough that the musical ensemble hesitated and the sound faded away, loudly enough that every single individual in the Cotton Club absorbed every syllable. "You've got a lot of audacity appearing here tonight, boy. You believe you're important? You believe operating a handful of small-time policy operations in Negro Town transforms you into a genuine gangster? Listen, I've been attempting to show restraint with you people, attempting to offer you coloreds an opportunity to be employed by me and create something worthwhile for yourselves, but you're too dim-witted to recognize when somebody's extending you kindness." The entire establishment went completely quiet. 200 people ceased talking, ceased moving, ceased drawing breath because Dutch Schultz, the most dominant bootlegger in New York, the individual whose criminal enterprise produced $20 million each year, the criminal who had never retreated from anyone, was openly degrading Bumpy Johnson using terminology so bigoted and so dismissive that even in 1935, even in a whites-only establishment in the heart of Harlem, people were stunned by the pure contempt in Schultz's tone. Bumpy Johnson didn't rise to his feet, didn't grab for the .45 automatic he kept on him, didn't produce any hostile movement whatsoever. He simply gazed upward at Schultz, with eyes that revealed absolutely no feeling. No fury, no terror, no response to the slur or the insult, and waited for Schultz to conclude. The silence in the Cotton Club was total. Guests at surrounding tables were watching, both appalled and captivated, observing this public degradation of an individual who was regarded as one of Harlem's most formidable operators, but who was sitting there absorbing this verbal assault without retaliating, without standing up for himself, without doing anything besides staring upward at the white individual who was bellowing racial insults at him before hundreds of onlookers. And then Bumpy Johnson began to speak. His tone was so soft that people needed to lean forward to catch it, so composed that it appeared entirely separate from the rage Schultz was exhibiting, so frigid that multiple witnesses afterward characterized it as the most terrifying sound they'd ever experienced, because it held absolutely no warmth, no feeling, just a declaration of truth delivered with the assurance of a magistrate delivering a verdict. "You've got 7 days to remove every single one of your associates from Harlem. Following that, any white individual I discover operating policy in my territory gets killed. You desire to degrade me publicly, you desire to hurl insults at me before all these witnesses. That's acceptable. That's your decision. But decisions carry repercussions, Mr. Schultz. And the repercussion of showing disrespect to Bumpy Johnson is that your associates begin dying, not taken into custody, not assaulted, deceased. You've got 7 days. Make good use of them." Schultz tilted his head backward and released a laugh, an enormous, authentic laugh that occupied the silent establishment, the laugh of an individual who was unable to accept what he was experiencing, who perceived the whole situation as absurd. 7 days, Schultz bellowed, continuing to laugh. "This Negro is issuing me a 7-day warning. You all catching this, everybody? The boy believes he can deliver Dutch Schultz ultimatums. That's the most amusing thing I've encountered all week." Schultz rotated to speak to the entire establishment, performing for the audience like a performer on a platform. You all absorbed his words. Bumpy Johnson. This insignificant person from the streets believes he can issue threats against me, believes he can establish demands. Well, allow me to inform you of something, boy. He pivoted back toward Johnson. In 7 days, you'll be under my employment or you'll be deceased. Those represent your sole alternatives. There's no third possibility where you somehow prevail because Negroes don't prevail against white individuals. That's simply the way existence functions. And if you're too unintelligent to comprehend that, well, I'll provide instruction the difficult way. Johnson offered no reply. He merely retrieved what was left of his bourbon, emptied the glass, rose to his feet slowly, and proceeded toward the doorway. The audience separated for him like he carried disease. Like proximity to him was hazardous now that Dutch Schultz had openly designated him for elimination. Johnson proceeded past Schultz without acknowledging him, proceeded past Schultz's protection detail, who became tense but didn't obstruct him, proceeded out of the Cotton Club into the Harlem September darkness, and vanished into the shadows. Schultz observed his departure, still expressing amusement, still moving his head at the ridiculousness of the confrontation. He went back to his seating, requested another beverage, and devoted the remainder of the evening retelling the incident to whoever would pay attention, detailing how he'd positioned that arrogant colored individual in his proper place, how Johnson had simply remained there accepting it like all coloreds do when white individuals remind them who's truly holding authority, how Harlem would be entirely under Schultz's dominance within 30 days because the final opposition had just been demolished before 200 observers. Dutch Schultz retired for the night that Monday, September 16th, 1935, convinced he'd achieved victory, convinced he'd openly humiliated his final significant adversary in Harlem, convinced the struggle was essentially concluded. 6 hours and 43 minutes afterward, the initial corpse was located. To comprehend what transpired next, to comprehend how 8 individuals perished in 7 days with such exactness that it would transform New York's criminal environment for the following century, one needs to comprehend what was occupying Bumpy Johnson's thoughts as he departed from the Cotton Club that Monday evening. Johnson wasn't taken aback by Schultz's conduct. He'd been aware for months that Schultz regarded him with disdain, that Schultz viewed colored criminals to be lesser operators who survived only with white authorization, that Schultz assumed conquering Harlem would be as straightforward as arriving with sufficient weapons and sufficient funds to defeat local opposition. Johnson had been monitoring Schultz's Harlem initiative for 18 months, had monitored Schultz force Madam Street. Claire, into stepping away, had monitored him compel Casper Holstein to cease operations, had monitored him methodically eliminate every other important black operator through a mixture of payments, intimidation, and brutality that was savagely successful because the majority of Harlem's criminals simply didn't possess the assets to resist Schultz's crushing advantages in finances, political relationships, and weaponry. But Johnson had also been monitoring Schultz commit errors, significant errors, tactical mistakes that exposed fundamental misconceptions about how authority genuinely operated in Harlem, about what rendered colored criminals dangerous, about the distinction between dominating territory through intimidation and genuinely sustaining extended control through community backing and through organizational skill. Schultz's most significant error was presuming that brutality alone would prove adequate to dominate Harlem. He'd arrived with weapons and funds and white advantage, but he hadn't arrived with comprehension. He didn't grasp that Harlem's policy businesses functioned due to community confidence, because individuals trusted that the operators, in spite of being lawbreakers, were at minimum Harlem residents who comprehended the area and who possessed some investment in preserving the community instead of merely extracting resources from it. Schultz's money collectors were outsiders, white individuals who entered Harlem to collect funds and who addressed local residents with disdain, and that generated bitterness that Schultz either failed to perceive or didn't concern himself about. Schultz's second error was executing his acquisition through observable public brutality that drew scrutiny and generated symbols of resistance. When Schultz eliminated a black policy operator, that operator's relatives and partners became adversaries who might assist anyone challenging Schultz. When Schultz physically attacked runners who didn't yield, those runners circulated accounts throughout the area about Schultz's cruelty, rotating public sentiment against him even as his businesses grew. But Schultz's most significant error, the catastrophic mistake that would deprive him of 8 individuals and his complete Harlem enterprise, was the public degradation at the Cotton Club by bellowing bigoted insults at Johnson before 200 observers, by transforming the struggle from business matters to personal matters, by converting what might have been an uncomplicated territorial disagreement into a judgment on whether white criminals could openly show disrespect to black criminals without repercussion. Schultz had provided Johnson something priceless: ethical legitimacy. As Johnson traveled through Harlem's pathways after exiting the Cotton Club, moving toward his residence on West 139th Street, his consciousness was processing the ramifications of what had just occurred and developing a counteraction that would be so conclusive, so merciless, so powerful that it would create guidelines about race and dignity and authority that would regulate New York's criminal society for the subsequent 100 years. The counteraction Johnson developed that evening possessed 3 crucial components. First, absolute operational invisibility. Johnson would vanish from public observation immediately, would shut his policy operations temporarily, would cease executing observable business, would disappear so completely that Schultz's associates couldn't locate him to strike back. This would accomplish 2 objectives. It would safeguard Johnson from the unavoidable counter-assault Schultz would initiate, and it would generate the perception that Johnson had been frightened into concealment by Schultz's public intimidation, which would render Schultz overconfident and reckless. Second, methodical removal of Schultz's essential operators. Johnson wouldn't assault Schultz personally. That would be both challenging. Schultz was excessively well defended and unproductive. Eliminating Schultz would activate enormous payback from Schultz's criminal enterprise and from other white criminals who would interpret it as colored lawbreakers exceeding permissible boundaries. Instead, Johnson would eliminate the 8 individuals who genuinely managed Schultz's Harlem businesses, the money collectors who gathered funds, the intimidators who frightened people, the policy operation managers who handled wagers. Eliminate those 8 individuals. Eliminate them savagely. Eliminate them visibly. Eliminate them with messages that clarified why they were perishing, and Schultz's complete Harlem enterprise would disintegrate without Johnson needing to combat Schultz's entire criminal network. Third, transmit a communication that would persist beyond this immediate struggle. This couldn't be solely about expelling Schultz from Harlem. This needed to be about creating a guideline that would regulate future encounters between white and black criminals. That showing disrespect to black lawbreakers, that utilizing bigoted terminology, that presuming white dominance provided you permission to address colored criminals with disdain, all of that would produce severe repercussions. The communication needed to be explicit enough that future white criminals would contemplate very thoroughly before insulting a black criminal publicly, would comprehend that racial dignity wasn't discretionary, but was instead a question of existence. Johnson arrived at his residence at roughly 1:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. He didn't rest. Instead, he devoted the subsequent 4 hours conferring with his most reliable partners, individuals who'd collaborated with him for years, who demonstrated their faithfulness and their competence, who would execute instructions without requesting explanations, and who would preserve confidences even under physical coercion. Johnson provided these individuals a roster of 8 identities, 8 of Schultz's essential Harlem operators, the individuals who genuinely made Schultz's enterprise operate, the money collectors, the intimidators, the policy operation administrators, the people whose deaths would collapse. Schultz's Harlem investments without necessitating an unfeasible direct assault on Schultz's complete criminal network. Johnson's directives were exact. These 8 individuals perish in the subsequent 7 days, one each day in sequence of the roster. Eliminate them using whatever method you choose, but ensure each death is located promptly, and ensure each corpse carries a message tallying how many remain. Begin with Vincent Mell tomorrow evening, Tuesday. He's a money collector, functions in central Harlem, completes his collections around 11 p.m. Capture him following his final pickup. Subject him to physical torture somewhere secluded so he comprehends why he's perishing. Then abandon the corpse where it'll be located Tuesday morning. Attach a message that states, 1 down, 7 to go, leave Harlem. Then pause 24 hours and capture the subsequent one on the roster. Continue progressing until all 8 are deceased or until Schultz retreats from Harlem entirely. One of Johnson's associates posed the predictable inquiry. Bumpy, if we eliminate 8 of Schultz's people, he's going to pursue us intensely. He's going to attempt to eliminate you, eliminate all of us, incinerate Harlem if necessary. How do we endure that? Johnson expressed amusement, a frigid expression of amusement that didn't extend to his eyes. Schultz cannot eliminate what he cannot locate. Beginning tomorrow, I'm vanishing. You all maintain low visibility, function through intermediaries. Don't execute anything that attracts scrutiny except eliminating Schultz's people. Schultz will be searching for me, searching for you, interrogating people throughout Harlem, attempting to locate us. But everybody in Harlem observed what Schultz executed tonight at the Cotton Club. Everybody absorbed him, insult me with those terms, observed him degrade me publicly. You believe anybody in Harlem is going to assist Schultz in locating us? You believe people are going to cooperate with the white individual who entered our area, insulting us with slurs and informing us we're too dim-witted to manage our own businesses. Schultz transformed this into a personal matter. He transformed it into issues of race and dignity. And that signifies Harlem will shield us because eliminating Schultz's people isn't solely business anymore. It's retribution for every degradation, every insult, every occasion white criminals addressed us like we were insignificant. We've got 7 days to eliminate 8 individuals. Following that, Schultz either retreats entirely or we continue eliminating his people until he does. It's that straightforward. By 5:30 a.m., Tuesday morning, Johnson's group had completed the strategy. Each of the 8 objectives had been delegated to particular executioners. Monitoring had been organized to follow the objectives' activities and determine when they'd be most susceptible. Resources had been assembled, weapons, vehicles, secure locations where physical torture could be executed without residents detecting the cries. Everything was prepared. At 6 a.m., Bumpy Johnson departed from his residence carrying a modest suitcase, entered a vehicle operated by one of his partners, and disappeared. For the subsequent 7 days, nobody beyond Johnson's inner circle would observe him or possess knowledge of his whereabouts. Dutch Schultz would invest the complete week searching for Johnson, would present considerable funds for details about his position, would intimidate and frighten people throughout Harlem attempting to locate the individual who'd guaranteed to eliminate his operators, but Johnson had transformed into a phantom, existing in the methodical eliminations of Schultz's associates, but invisible to the people attempting to locate him. And at 6:23 a.m., Tuesday morning, fewer than 5 hours after Johnson had issued the elimination instruction, Vincent Mell's corpse was located stuffed in a garbage container behind a storage facility on West 145th Street. Vincent Clutch Mell, 38 years of age, was one of Schultz's most productive policy money collectors in central Harlem. He'd been executing the assignment for 18 months, was recognized for being resilient and dependable, had physically attacked multiple runners who'd attempted to steal funds, was broadly viewed as one of the essential people making Schultz's HARLEM acquisition effective. Mel completed his Monday evening collections around 11 p.m., gathered roughly $4,000 in currency and hundreds of wagering documents, and was expected to transfer everything to Schultz's primary policy operation before returning home. Mel never completed that transfer. At roughly 11:15 p.m., Monday evening, while Schultz was still at the Cotton Club boasting to his partners about how he'd degraded Bumpy Johnson, 3 of Johnson's associates intercepted Mel's vehicle on a secluded side pathway, compelled him off the route at gunpoint, extracted him from the automobile while he was still attempting to access his own weapon. They transported him to an unoccupied storage facility on West 147th Street, a structure Johnson's criminal network dominated, a location where the barriers were sufficiently thick that cries wouldn't travel to adjacent structures. What occurred in that storage facility over the subsequent multiple hours was intended not solely to eliminate Mel, but to transmit a communication through his remains about what transpired to people who labored for Dutch Schultz in HARLEM after Schultz had openly shown disrespect to Bumpy Johnson. They initiated with Mel's hands, utilized a hammer to methodically shatter every digit, pulverizing the bone gradually while Mel cried out and pleaded and attempted to clarify that he was merely executing his assignment, that he possessed nothing personal against Johnson, that he apologized about whatever Schultz had stated. But Johnson's associates weren't interested in apologies. They labored systematically, shattering each digit separately, ensuring Mel experienced every strike, ensuring he comprehended that this suffering was the direct repercussion of laboring for an individual who'd insulted their superior using slurs before 200 people. Then they proceeded to his face, assaulted him with fists and with small wooden implements, shattering his nose and his jaw, dislodging teeth, closing his eyes with inflammation, ensuring that when the corpse was located, it would be clear that Mel had endured extensively before perishing. Between the physical assaults, they interrogated him. "You comprehend why this is transpiring to you, Vincent? You comprehend what your superior executed tonight? He showed disrespect to our people, insulted us with slurs, addressed us like we're insignificant, and you labor for him. You gather funds for him. You assist him in conquering our area, so you compensate for his errors." Mel attempted to negotiate, proposed to cease laboring for Schultz immediately, proposed to provide them details about Schultz's businesses, proposed funds and assistance and anything else he could conceive that might make them cease. But the individuals torturing him weren't interested in negotiations. This wasn't about obtaining details or about creating agreements. This was about eliminating Mel in a manner that would terrify the other 7 people on Johnson's roster, that would transmit a communication to Schultz about the price of showing disrespect to black criminals. Following the hands in the face, they utilized an ice pick, penetrated Mel 11 occasions in areas that weren't immediately fatal: shoulders, upper legs, midsection, injuries that produced enormous suffering without promptly eliminating. Injuries that made Mel cry out and weep and beg until his vocal capacity failed and he could only produce soft sounds. They invested their effort with this portion, distributing the penetrating injuries across perhaps 60 minutes, ensuring Mel encountered every moment of anguish. Finally, when Mel was barely aware from suffering and blood depletion and exhaustion, they severed his throat, utilized a substantial blade to slice through muscle and cartilage and windpipe, cutting so profoundly that the blade contacted vertebrae, nearly separating Mel's head from his body. The throat injury was the final sensation Mel encountered before he perished. The feeling of his blood flowing out, the inability to draw breath, the awareness that he was finally being permitted to perish after hours of physical torture. They inserted Mel's corpse into a substantial metal garbage container, transported the container to the passageway behind the storage facility on West 145th Street, where they were aware it would be located during the morning sanitation cycles, and before departing, they attached a message to Mel's shirt with a straight pin. The message was composed in block letters with a pencil on standard paper, the type of message that couldn't be connected to any particular person or position. 1 down, 7 to go. Leave Harlem. At 6:23 a.m., Tuesday morning, sanitation employee James Robertson located the container, opened it to investigate why it possessed such weight, discovered Mel's remains, and immediately started yelling for assistance while stumbling in reverse from the odor of blood and mortality. Authorities arrived, extracted Mel's corpse from the container, observed the magnitude of the injuries, examined the message, and immediately comprehended they were examining the initiation of a criminal conflict instead of an isolated homicide. The message's communication was explicit. 7 additional people were going to perish, one by one, until someone, presumably Dutch Schultz, departed Harlem as instructed. By 9 a.m. Tuesday, information had circulated throughout New York's criminal society that Vincent Mel was deceased, that he'd been subjected to torture for hours before being eliminated, that a message had guaranteed 7 additional deaths were approaching. Dutch Schultz absorbed the information while consuming breakfast at his Bronx base of operations, initially rejected it as probably disconnected to the Cotton Club confrontation, but then discovered about the message and comprehended that Bumpy Johnson had genuinely intended what he'd stated, that the 7-day deadline wasn't hollow posturing but was a precise guarantee that Schultz's Harlem operators would begin perishing. Schultz's response was foreseeable: fury, intimidation, instructions to locate Johnson immediately and eliminate him. But Johnson had vanished. His residence was vacant. His policy operations were shut. Nobody possessed knowledge of his whereabouts or could supply details about his position. Schultz invested Tuesday presenting funds for details, dispatching associates throughout Harlem to interrogate people, intimidating people who asserted they possessed no knowledge. But Harlem's community, still enraged about Monday evening's public degradation at the Cotton Club, declined to cooperate. Nobody would assist the white criminal who'd insulted their people with slurs in locating the black criminal who was eliminating his associates in retribution. Wednesday morning, September 18th, Dutch Schultz located an envelope inserted beneath the entrance of his Bronx base of operations. Inside was a message in the identical block letters: 1 down, 7 to go. Your money collector is deceased because you showed disrespect to us. The subsequent one perishes today. Retreat from Harlem or continue tallying corpses. At 2:15 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, Raymond Red Sullivan's corpse was located in an unoccupied structure on Lenox Avenue, shot once in the rear of the skull, execution fashion. His 2 protection personnel, who'd been delegated to defend him following Mel's death, were located nearby. Both shot multiple occasions in what seemed to be a brief firefight they'd been defeated inconclusively. The message attached to Sullivan's corpse: 2 down, 6 to go. Thursday morning, another envelope materialized at Schultz's base of operations: 2 down, 6 to go. Every day you remain in Harlem, another one of your people perishes. How many corpses will it require before you comprehend? Depart now. At 9:40 p.m., Wednesday, technically early Thursday morning, Thomas Little Tommy Brennan was located in his residence, penetrated 17 occasions with an ice pick, eliminated in the identical systematic torture fashion that had characterized Mel's death. The message: 3 down, 5 to go, final opportunity to depart. By Thursday afternoon, Dutch Schultz was no longer dismissive or assured. He was terrified. Genuinely terrified in a manner he'd never encountered before in his criminal occupation. 3 of his essential Harlem operators were deceased in 3 days, eliminated with exactness that indicated thorough preparation and competence that Schultz hadn't anticipated. And the messages kept materializing, kept tallying downward, kept reminding him that 5 additional deaths were guaranteed unless he retreated entirely from Harlem. Thursday evening, another envelope: 3 down, 5 to go. The subsequent one perishes tomorrow, then 4 additional after that. Or you can retreat from Harlem today and nobody else needs to perish. Your decision. Schultz convened an urgent conference with his top subordinates, instructed them to locate Johnson regardless of expense, to eliminate him and everyone connected with him, to incinerate Harlem if required, but to terminate these eliminations. But locating Johnson remained unfeasible, and Schultz's remaining Harlem operators were terrified, comprehending that 5 of them were still on the roster, that 5 additional corpses were approaching unless Schultz surrendered Harlem entirely. Friday produced 2 additional deaths. Anthony Little, Tony Benedetto, assaulted to death in a passageway. Joseph Joey Numbers Catalano, shot in the face in a crowded dining establishment, while dozens of observers witnessed 2 colored individuals calmly enter, eliminate him, and depart before anyone could respond. The messages: 5 down, 3 to go, and 6 down, 2 to go. Depart now or perish. And Friday evening, another envelope at Schultz's base of operations. This one containing a communication that was extended beyond the previous messages, that articulated precisely why these eliminations were transpiring. 6 down, 2 to go. You desire to comprehend why your people are perishing? Because you showed disrespect to us. You entered our area, insulted us with slurs, informed us we're too dim-witted to manage our own businesses, addressed us like we're insignificant. You believed being white rendered you superior. You believed we'd simply accept your degradations and yield like obedient coloreds. You were mistaken. Depart from Harlem. Never return. Don't ever show disrespect to black brothers again. The final eliminations. Saturday and Sunday. Saturday morning, Harold Bunny Weinstein, one of Schultz's top subordinates who'd been coordinating the Harlem enterprise, was located shot in the rear of the skull in his vehicle on West 47th Street in Midtown Manhattan, eliminated in broad daylight in one of the most active portions of the city. The message: 7 down, 1 to go. Your conclusion arrives tomorrow. Dutch Schultz invested Saturday in a condition of near terror, fortified in his Bronx base of operations, surrounded by protection personnel, transmitting communications to his remaining Harlem operator, Patrick O'Brien, instructing him to enter concealment, to endure Sunday, to demonstrate that Johnson's intimidations weren't unavoidable. O'Brien invested Sunday in a secure location in the Bronx, defended by 4 armed protectors. But at 8:47 p.m. Sunday evening, a female knocked on the entrance, asserting she possessed the incorrect residence. When a protector opened the entrance, she threw a gasoline explosive inside. The residence erupted in fire. The protectors ran for the rear exit and were immediately eliminated by shotgun fire from individuals waiting in the passageway. O'Brien attempted to escape through a window but was shot before he could climb through, his corpse falling back into the burning residence. When firefighters extinguished the fire and retrieved O'Brien's severely burned remains, they located a message partially burned but still readable. 8 down, 0 to go. Harlem belongs to Harlem. Don't ever show disrespect to black brothers. Depart and never return. The aftermath. A communication that persisted 100 years. Monday morning, September 23rd, Dutch Schultz received his final communication from Bumpy Johnson. 8 of your associates are deceased. They perished because you made a decision to show disrespect to me publicly, to insult me with slurs before hundreds of people, to address colored criminals like we're inferior to white lawbreakers. You believed I was making empty threats when I stated your people would perish. You expressed amusement at me. You insulted me as a dim-witted slur who didn't comprehend how the genuine criminal environment operates. I wasn't making empty threats. Your 8 deceased associates demonstrate that. You possess 24 hours to terminate every enterprise you possess in Harlem. Following that, I initiate eliminating your people everywhere, not solely Harlem, Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan. 1 each day until you're entirely absent from our area. This isn't about finances or territory anymore. This is about dignity. This is about instructing you and every other white criminal in New York that you cannot show disrespect to black brothers without compensating a price. That price is 8 corpses thus far. It'll be additional if you don't depart. Depart. Remain absent. And remember what it depleted from you when you forgot that colored criminals deserve the identical dignity you demand for yourself. Bumpy Johnson. By Tuesday evening, every one of Dutch Schultz's Harlem businesses had been terminated. He'd extracted his people entirely, surrendered 18 months of labor and considerable investment, retreated from Harlem, instead of continuing to lose associates to an adversary who demonstrated the competence and the determination to eliminate indefinitely. The account circulated throughout New York's criminal society, retold in every speakeasy and policy operation and organized crime gathering location. Dutch Schultz had openly degraded Bumpy Johnson at the Cotton Club, had insulted him with racial slurs before 200 observers, and within 7 days, 8 of Schultz's associates were deceased, and Schultz had been expelled from Harlem by a black criminal who demonstrated that disrespect produced fatal repercussions. The instruction persisted not merely years, but generations. White criminals who interacted with black operators following 1935 were cautious about terminology, cautious about exhibitions of disdain, cautious about presuming racial dominance provided them authorization to address colored lawbreakers as inferiors, because everyone remembered what transpired to Dutch Schultz when he forgot that dignity flows in both directions, when he presumed being white signified he could state anything to anyone without confronting repercussions. Bumpy Johnson emerged from concealment on Tuesday, September 24th, proceeding casually down Lenox Avenue like he'd never been absent. When journalists interrogated about the 8 homicides, Johnson's reply was straightforward. I possess no knowledge of what you're referencing, but I'll state this. Harlem defends its own. Anybody who enters here showing disrespect to our people, insulting us with slurs, addressing us like we're insignificant, they discover that decisions carry repercussions. Dutch Schultz made his decision Monday evening at the Cotton Club. He decided to show disrespect to me publicly, and he compensated for that decision with 8 of his people. That's simply how it operates. You show disrespect to black brothers, you compensate the price. Remember that, and you'll exist considerably longer. Dutch Schultz never returned to Harlem. 1 month afterward, October 23rd, 1935, Schultz himself was eliminated in Newark by assassins dispatched by other white criminals who determined he was excessively reckless, excessively hazardous, excessively probable to attract scrutiny on all of them. And Bumpy Johnson, he acquired Schultz's former businesses, constructed them into a criminal empire, and transformed into a legend, not solely because he'd expelled Dutch Schultz, but because he'd created a guideline that would regulate criminal encounters for the subsequent century. Don't ever show disrespect to black brothers, not publicly, not privately, not if you desire to continue drawing breath. 8 corpses in 7 days. A communication composed in blood that New York's criminal society never forgot,